Chuka had always hated Musa's barber shop, but it was the only place nearby that could give him a clean fade at a decent price. Something about the place felt wrong, though. The air inside was always stale, thick with the scent of old hair and something metallic, like rust or blood. The small radio on the shelf crackled, never quite catching a full station. Voices whispered from it, distorted. Almost human, but not quite. Musa, the barber, didn't seem to notice. He never did. Musa was an odd man, tall, gaunt, with deep-set eyes that never quite met yours. His fingernails were yellowed, cracked at the edges, and as he worked, his lips moved in a silent mutter, speaking words Chuka couldn't understand. That day, Chuka's eyes drifted to the workstation and froze. Among the usual tools, clippers, scissors, brushes, sat something strange. A rusted old clipper, its metal dull, yet its blades almost too sharp, glinting like they were alive. When Musa pressed it against his scalp, a cold, crawling sensation ran through Chuka, deep into his skin. He left the shop feeling strangely dizzy, rubbing at a small bump forming on his head. By the time he got home, it had started to itch. At first, Chuka thought it was just a minor irritation, a small bump from the clipper, nothing serious. But by the second day, it had swollen into something grotesque, a hard, pulsing lump that throbbed every time he touched it. The itch was unbearable, not on the surface, but deep inside, like something was crawling beneath his skin. His mother noticed him scratching absent-mindedly at dinner. "I've warned you about those dirty clippers, Chuka," she muttered, shaking her head. "You men don't listen. You share tools with strangers and bring sickness home." Annoyed, he leaned forward. "It's not that serious, Mummy. Look." She reached out to touch the bump and jerked her hand back instantly, eyes wide with fear. "Chuka, something is wrong." That night, the voices started. At first, faint whispers, like someone calling his name from the shadows. By the time he drifted into a restless sleep, they had grown louder, insidious, curling around his thoughts. His dreams were worse. He saw Musa standing over him, grinning, whispering in that strange language, his hands moving, but the clipper was floating, moving on its own, digging into Chuka's skull. He woke up gasping. His pillow was soaked, drenched in blackened blood and pus. With shaking hands, he stumbled to the mirror, and his breath caught in his throat. His scalp was splitting open, the wound pulsing. Something dark, writhing and alive, slithered just beneath his skin. Panic had fully set in. The cold tendrils of fear wrapped around Chuka's mind, tightening with every passing second. This wasn't a normal infection. It wasn't just a bad reaction to a dirty clipper. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. The grotesque wound on his scalp throbbed, pulsing as though something inside was shifting, moving. He threw on a cap, pulling it down tight, trying to suppress the nausea rising in his stomach. He needed help, fast. He rushed to the nearest clinic, closed. A knot tightened in his chest. He tried another, empty. Not a single nurse or doctor in sight. His breath came out shaky as he reached the last hospital he could think of. The white fluorescent lights buzzed softly, giving the place an eerie glow. The front desk had nurses, but the moment they saw him, their faces twisted, a mix of fear and revulsion. One nurse shifted uncomfortably. Another refused to meet his eyes. "We're at full capacity," one muttered, staring hard at her paperwork. "Try somewhere else." Chuka's pulse hammered in his ears. His hands turned cold. They knew. At work, it was worse. His co-workers, once friendly, now refused to meet his gaze. Conversation stopped when he entered the room. His boss, usually a chatty man who cracked jokes every morning, barely acknowledged him. The silence was suffocating. And then there was the way people moved around him. They never brushed against him, never touched him. When he greeted them, they nodded stiffly, stepping away like he carried a sickness that could leap onto their skin. Like he wasn't really there. And the voices, they only grew louder, hissing, whispering, laughing, calling his name. "Chuka, Chuka. You know what you must do." The fifth day pushed him to the edge. Sleep-deprived, half mad with terror, he did what only the desperate do. He sought out the one person who might understand. An elderly herbalist, a woman whispered about in hushed tones, a healer of strange afflictions. The moment she saw him, she gasped and took a step back. Her hands trembled as she made a quick sign of protection. "You have been marked." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight, sinking into his bones. Chuka's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed hard, eyes darting to the cap on his head. "The barber? He is no man. He serves an old hunger." The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening around them. "Then," she told him, "the curse of the barber, a legend that had survived through whispers, through missing men and forgotten names. A demon bound to a pair of clippers, passing from barber to barber. It feeds through the blade, carving its master's mark into its next vessel." Her voice wavered. "You are changing, boy." Chuka's breath hitched. His hands turned clammy. No, this wasn't real." Desperate, he yanked off his cap and turned to the dusty mirror in her shop. His breath caught in his throat. His skin was graying, not from illness, but from something unnatural, something creeping through his veins like ink-staining paper. The sores on his scalp had shifted, no longer random, no longer wounds. They were symbols, intricate carvings, ancient, unholy. The whispers wrapped around his thoughts, coiling through his mind like serpents. Kill Musa. Take his place. Complete the cycle. His hands trembled. His reflection stared back at him, his own face looking less like his own. Was this a warning or an order? Chuka couldn't fight this alone. The whispers clawed at his mind, urging him to finish the cycle, to become the next barber. But he refused. He would not be consumed. He would end it. With his scalp pulsing and his vision swimming, he stumbled into the town square, calling out to anyone who would listen. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Musa is not just a barber, he is a servant of something evil." Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. A few men chuckled, shaking their heads. "Chuka, go home," one scoffed. "You're not well." "Too much stress, my friend," another added, smirking. Chuka's hands trembled, his breathing ragged. They didn't believe him. They thought he was losing his mind. Fine, he would show them. With a shaky breath, he reached up and ripped off his cap. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps of horror rippled through the crowd. Mothers clutched their children. The bravest men took a step back, their faces twisting in revulsion. The symbols on his scalp were alive, pulsating, shifting, their grotesque carvings twisting into new shapes before their eyes. Dark liquid seeped from the wounds, running down Chuka's forehead like blackened tears. Then a wail cut through the air. An old woman collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. "My son," she cried. "He went to Musa's shop 3 months ago and never came home." The atmosphere shifted. More voices followed. Stories of missing men, of vanished boys, of people who had entered Musa's shop but were never seen again. The fear became rage. Someone grabbed a machete. Another snatched up a torch. A young woman carried a bottle of holy water, muttering prayers under her breath. "Burn the shop," someone yelled. The crowd roared in agreement, and so they marched. The barber shop stood eerily silent when they arrived, its door slightly ajar, as if inviting them inside. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. Inside, Musa was waiting. He sat calmly in his barber's chair, hands resting on his lap. A slow, knowing smile stretched across his face, his eyes glinting with something unnatural. The dim light flickered, casting shadows that moved even when nothing else did. The small radio on the shelf crackled softly, but it wasn't playing music. It was whispering. Musa tilted his head, his voice echoing, layered with something inhuman. "You shouldn't have come back." Then the rusted clipper twitched. It rose from the table, hovering midair, clicking open and shut like a hungry insect. Chuka didn't think. He lunged first. The villagers followed. The battle began, mirrors shattered, reflecting twisted, monstrous images of Musa that weren't truly there. Chairs splintered, their wood snapping like brittle bones. Holy water sizzled as it hit the walls, the very air screaming in response. Then fire. Someone set a torch to the curtains, and within seconds the shop was alive with flames. Still, Musa smiled. Even as the fire swallowed the shop, even as his skin peeled away in curling, blackened sheets, he did not scream. He did not burn like a man, because what lay beneath his skin was not human. The flames climbed higher, licking at the wooden beams, devouring the shop inch by inch. Smoke curled toward the ceiling in twisting black tendrils, as if the fire itself was alive. But Musa did not burn. He laughed, a sound so deep, so unnatural, that it rattled the very air. It wasn't just his voice. It was layered as if countless others laughed with him. Voices of the lost, the taken. Then his skin began to peel. It curled away like dried leaves, revealing something that had never been human. A writhing mass of hair, blades, and shadow. His form twisted and pulsed, strands of black, living hair stretching outward like the legs of an insect. Within them, countless rusted clippers and razors clicked open and shut, like hungry jaws snapping in anticipation. His face was gone. In its place was a shifting void, filled with glinting teeth and too many eyes, staring, unblinking, consuming everything at once. The villagers screamed. A floating clipper shot forward, slicing through the air with unnatural speed. A man gasped, his throat opening in a spray of blood before he even understood what had happened. Another staggered backward, staring at the place where his arm had been, now severed cleanly at the shoulder. Chuka dodged, his heartbeat a hammer against his ribs. "Throw the holy water!" someone screamed. A glass bottle shattered against Musa's shifting form, and for the first time he shrieked, not in rage but in pain. The sound was inhuman, distorted, as though it came from another world. The very walls cracked, the shadows recoiled, the hair burned. But it wasn't enough. Musa lunged, his bladed tendrils whipping outward, slicing through flesh, through bone. The villagers scattered, chanting prayers, hurling salt and charms. But the monster kept coming. Chuka knew what he had to do. His hands trembled as he lunged for the rusted clipper, the cursed tool that had started it all. The moment his fingers wrapped around it, a wave of pure agony shot through his veins. The whispers screamed, not Musa's voice, something deeper, older, the entity itself. The air thickened, vibrating as the shop seemed to bend inward, as if reality itself was warping around them. Musa's monstrous form twisted toward Chuka, tendrils snapping out, reaching. Chuka squeezed the clipper tight. The metal groaned in his grip, and then it shattered. A shockwave of dark energy burst outward from Musa's body. The shop walls exploded, wood and glass splintering into the night. Villagers were thrown back as the force of it ripped through the air. The fire roared, swallowing everything. Musa's form convulsed, tendrils flailing violently, his body imploding in on itself. His screams were not his own anymore. They belonged to the entity, to the ancient horror that had lived within him. His body crumbled into dust, devoured by the very darkness that had once controlled him. And then, silence. The villagers watched in stunned silence as Musa's shop burned to the ground, the fire consuming the last traces of his cursed existence. No one spoke. No one mourned. They just watched, making sure nothing survived. Chuka collapsed, his body weak, his scalp still tingling from the energy that had coursed through him. They carried him to the town priest, who wasted no time anointing his head with oil, whispering desperate prayers. The symbols carved into Chuka's scalp faded. The whispers finally stopped. For the first time in weeks, Chuka felt free. The town breathed a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over, or so they thought. Days later, after the smoke had settled, an old man wandered past the ruins of the shop. The ground was scorched, the earth blackened, but something gleamed beneath the ash. He bent down, brushing the soot away, and his fingers closed around a rusted clipper. The moment he touched it, a slow, creeping darkness settled over his eyes. The clipper hummed softly, its blades twitching. The old man stood up, turned, and walked away, muttering to himself in a language not his own. The barber's curse lived on. If you enjoyed this story and want more spine-chilling, immersive tales, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss an update when the next gripping story drops. Stay tuned for more thrilling narratives. You won't want to miss what's coming next.